Evening, we're going to welcome, please, to the Baobab stage, the fabulous Lynne Murphy.
As Tim said at the beginning, the title of my talk is Little Things Mean a Lot. A lot of people worry about the loss of words.
Shall we dance?
Just doing a little dance.
Okay, the loss of words. And a few years ago, I don't know if you remember this, there was a big outcry because the Oxford Junior Dictionary stopped printing a few words in it. They replaced some words like acorn and bluebell with words like website. And there was this big outcry, and I just edited a collection of people writing about children's dictionaries, and the people involved at Oxford Dictionaries at the time would not write about it because they'd received threats over this. I mean, it was so vociferous. And one of the things that came out of this was this book, The Lost Words. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's by a poet and an illustrator, and you can buy a book, and you can buy a sequel, and you can buy workbooks, and you can buy puzzles, and you can buy note cards, and you can buy card games, and I'm not at all jealous as somebody with a book to sell. But anyway, it really went something crazy, and there were all these fundraising things and city councils banding together to buy every child, or make sure that every child had access in their school to this book. Because everybody was so afraid of losing these words. But none of these words were actually at risk, right? These were just people not understanding that you don't put a word in a children's dictionary if it's a word you expect the child to already know, right? And none of those words over the last century is really, conquer maybe a little bit, but most of those words are still being used perfectly well. Dandelion, in fact, has gone up quite a bit. So people are worrying about these words in the way that people who are worried about conservation worry about tigers and pandas, and not always about roaches and bees and ants. Because there are only a few tigers and pandas, but there are trillions of bees, right? But if we lose the bees, we're in trouble, right? And that's what I want to sort of think about in relation to panicking about words. Let me give you something to panic about. This is the word the over the last 200 years. And this is in American President's State of the Union addresses. The is telling right off, right? What's happened to the? 15% less the in books now than 200 years ago. Even though we've got a band now called the. You'd think that would bring the numbers up, right? But actually we had that band in the 80s, back before Google, because nobody would name your band that now, because you'd never be able to Google it. Google ignores those. And if you want to have a the tribute band, you might call it the. And then you can make sentences like, are they the fans love? Right? We shouldn't be running out of those. And yet, we are running out of those. We are having fewer and fewer and fewer those. So I'm going to pause right now and have a little bit of a grammar lesson so I can talk about that some more, because we are in the land where grammar comes from where English grammar comes from, but also the land where English grammar is not taught. If you want to learn English grammar, go somewhere else around the world and you'll know a little bit more about it. So I need to introduce a little bit of vocabulary. So the is what we call a determiner. A determiner is a word that goes before a noun phrase, or goes in the front of a noun phrase, to determine what you're talking about, which one of these things you're talking about. So, is it a tennis champion, or the tennis champion, or that tennis champion, or my tennis champion? We don't know. There are two of these determiners that are special, and those are called articles. And in English, our articles are a and the. Okay? And and the do indicate different things about the sort of definiteness of what we're talking about. So, to quote this is the day your life will surely change is slightly different from this is a day your life will surely change. You know, so the latter one gives us the sense that it's one of many possible days, and the first one gives us the sense of something particular. When I say that it's a special word, or that these two words, these articles are special words, I mean really special, because only 8% of the world's languages have a special word for and a special word for the. Now you might be thinking, but I know lots of languages like that, but their words aren't special for and the. So we have a special word for that only means and a special word for the, which we only use for the. Whereas in a lot of languages, this word for one is the same as the word for right? So if you speak French, right, it's and that's the word for and the word for one. In English, they used to be the same, way a long time ago, but we separated them out. We made a special word for we made a special word to be our article, And us doing okay. So this is in books over the past 100 or so years. And again, we see the going way down, and us staying the same, or about the same. So this is the language where of about 2,000, no, I'm lying, of about 600 words, sorry, of about 600 languages that have been surveyed for this map, about 200 of them have a word for the, okay? It's the having both a special word for the and a special word for that's very special. And all the white ones here are the languages that have no the at all. Some in the middle, which I'm not showing the marks for on this map, so like Swedish doesn't have a word for the, it has a suffix for the. And some other languages will have a word for that, which they'll use kind of like we use our word for the, but they won't have separated them out. But the ones in white just don't have any way of saying the. Okay? How did we get the? Well, again, it started out as something else. It started out as the word "s" in Old English, and then that "s" became the this and that, because it had different forms depending on which words you used it with, where in the sentence it went. And so those different forms evolved into having different uses when we stopped using nominative and dative case and things like that in English. Those words, started meaning different things. And they all start with this sound that was originally a thorn. You can see a thorn in the first thing, which eventually, sometimes in some people's handwriting, ended up looking like this. And this is why you see ye old shoppy, right? Where the has what looks like a Y at the front. It was never ye, it was the, but it was spelt with this funny old letter. Okay? And the sound that is at the beginning of the and that, and there and all that, we spell it with TH, because the French decided when they invaded over in Hastings that was how English should be spelt instead of using thorns. And they gave that letter combination to two different sounds. So notice that the sound in then, there, you're vibrating your vocal cords when you say that. But in this, or not this, in think, thigh, thank, you're not vibrating your vocal cords. So there are two different sounds that we represent with the same letters because the French couldn't tell the difference. But what's interesting is all these hard the ones, they're all function words in English. They're all more grammatical words rather than words with a lot of meaning to them. And that might serve us a little purpose, because these are the words that tend to start phrases rather than being in the middle of them. So when you're hearing somebody talking to you and you hear the, your brain's going, let me start a new phrase. Let me parse this a different way. So there are all sorts of useful things going on for this the. In Yorkshire, they did something different. all right? They didn't end up with the from that. They ended up with that and took off the front. And so the Yorkshire t instead of the is because the sort of didn't make it that far north for a very long time. And so they used t for a while. Okay. But going back to that map with so many languages without a the, think about how many people don't have the. So if you think Mandarin Chinese does not have the, doesn't have a either, right? That's 1 billion people, you know, who, if they wanted to learn English, would have to learn a very weird word, okay? Same, most of the languages of India, most of the languages of Asia, you know, Japanese, Korean, Russian, do not have a the, okay? So this makes it a particularly challenging word for learners of English to get, except all of us were once learners of English, right? We somehow managed to get a feel for where the begins, where the belongs, and where the doesn't belong. But nobody ever taught us how. There's a famous, well maybe not famous, but there's a lovely story about a Russian man who went to London, and he kept asking people a very simple question. And he could see that they were able to answer this question, but they all shuffled away because he kept saying to them, "Excuse me, what is time?" Right? It seems like an unanswerable question in English, but you know, we put a the in there and it becomes a very simple question to us, right? So it's a very strange thing to know, when do you put the the, where do you not put the the? So when they try to teach people where to put a the, they give them nice simple rules. Like, you use an a or an an the first time you mention something, and then the second time you mention it, you say the. So, a man ran into the street, a car hit the man, right? That's all well and good until you look a little bit more carefully at the sentences they've provided you and realize there's a the in there for something that was never mentioned before. Why didn't the man run into a street? Okay, so this is sort of why it's so impossible. Here's another case. You get this all the time when you read recipes or follow instructions. Mix the flour and the baking powder and the milk. Roll out the dough. What dough? Nobody ever said anything about dough. Where'd the dough come from? I'm supposed to know about it already because it has a the in front of it. But nobody told me about the the. How was I supposed to know that? So the ends up being, for those of us who write in English, about 6% of what we write. So about 6 out of every 100 words is the. And so if you are somebody trying to learn English, a very safe bet is to just stick the wherever you can. Because those English people, they seem to do it all the time. So this is something called the flooding. It's known by that name in English language teaching circles. And you get sentences like, the role of the human resources is not only in the manufacture, but also important in the management. So this particular Chinese learner of English has just never put an abstract noun without putting a the in front of it. And fair enough, you know? How would you explain why you don't need a the in those cases? There isn't much logic, it seems like, to where we put our the. So everybody who plays a harp plays the harp, but an awful lot of people play bass, right? Or play drums. They can play the bass, but they often don't. You go to church, but you don't go to pub. When, you know, for many of us it's a more religious experience to go to the pub. You do things in the past, but in future. You go through the menopause, but not the puberty. You know, these things make no sense. So I do not blame anyone who has a hard time figuring out where to put the. And then, you know, on top of that, not all of us English speakers do it the same anyway, right? So there are places where British English uses the, where American wouldn't, and vice versa. So that's one thing you can tell about a the user or from someone's use of the is where they're from. You can also tell some other things about people from how much the they use, or at least there are some correlations between how much you use the and some of your other properties. People who get higher marks at university use more the. People who are organized and emotionally stable. These are studies done by psychologists on people's diary entries. They use more the. The more conscientious people use more the. Okay? So the is giving you something, it's indicating something about how you think and how you express yourself. And the thing is, if you use the, that means you're using more nouns. You're not saying it, you're not saying he, you're saying the farmer, right? You're being more specific about things in certain ways. You're using more big words rather than little short pronouns, and you put in more words per sentence. So those are all things that make you sound smarter. Men use more the than women, whereas women use more personal pronouns. Okay, is that because men are talking more about things and women are more talking about people? I'm not absolutely sure, the psychologist didn't tell me that. But also, the older people use the more than younger people do. Okay, and there are various hypotheses for why this might be. Maybe it's just this linguistic change in progress. You know, younger people use less the because English is becoming a less the full language. Or is it because older people talk about the world, and younger people talk about me, 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 me. It could be a little bit of that. Or it could just be you can't remember the name for people, so you have to say the nurse instead of saying Claire, right? So you get a little bit of that too. And then you have things like, my father always says, yes, she got the Covis, right? I don't know where he got the from. I don't know where he got the S on the end of it from. People get the Covis from my dad, and he searches for things on the Google. Socially conservative people also use more the than liberal people. I wrote this article about Donald Trump's use of the back when he debated Hillary Clinton all those years ago. And there's been lots of work on his use of the, where he says things like, I will be phenomenal to the women. Ask the gays what they think. I have a great relationship with the blacks. And you can see that people are going, oh, because these does feel a bit icky. Yeah. Why do they feel icky? They're making people seem like things a bit. They're making them seem like a group of indistinguishable things rather than individual people with diversity among them. And they're distancing him from those groups. And you can see that not just in Donald Trump's language, but in most people's language in different ways. So this nice little study of people speaking in the US Congress found that when Democrats were talking about Democrats, they usually said, Democrats believe blah, 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 blah. But when they talked about Republicans, they'd say, the Republicans believe, and the opposite for the other party. So, and you can see that happening in the UK too. I always notice it when people say the Americans. They're never being complimentary when they say the American. So that could give us all sorts of information about people, and it tells us when somebody's a waiter as well. You've got the waiter button. Okay, so that is giving us all kinds of information about things. Some of it's social information, some of it's about the people who are using the word, some of it's giving us information about our attitudes toward things. Sometimes it's just pointing out when we've got something particular versus something general. And yet it is sliding down. It used, in the British National Corpus between, no, this isn't the British National Corpus. I can't remember what this is. Anyway, otter and acorn, the words we saw at the beginning, nobody's ever been using those very much, but they're very, very stable. Whereas these words like the and of are a little bit more messy. So where did it come from? Where's it going? What can it tell us? All of these things are great mysteries, and that's why I love the. So thank you very much.
Brilliant, absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much, Lynne Murphy.